The Roy Orbison mystery finally solved, and it's worse than you think. What if one of the greatest voices in music history came with a price no one ever saw? What if the haunting songs, the lonely lyrics, the distant gaze were never just art, but real? Roy Orbison, the man in black behind those famous dark sunglasses, was admired for his angelic voice. But behind the fame, behind the velvet melodies, there was a darker story, one filled with pain, heartbreak, and secrets the world wasn't ready for. This is the part of his life nobody talks about, until now. Born on April 23, 1936 in Vernon, Texas, Roy Kelton Orbison grew up in the shadows of the Great Depression. His family was modest, money was tight, but music was everywhere. At just 6 years old, he got his first guitar. By 8, he was already performing on local radio. But there was something odd about his voice, something unexplainable. He could hit notes that others couldn't. He had a range that seemed unnatural. For years, fans and critics were mesmerized by how his voice could soar from a gentle whisper to a trembling high note. But now, documents and family interviews suggest something unusual may have happened in his youth. According to newly uncovered medical records, Roy underwent experimental sinus surgeries in his teens to treat chronic breathing problems. Back then, medical oversight was loose, especially in rural areas. Some now believe these procedures may have permanently altered his vocal system, stretching, tightening, or even damaging parts of it in ways that gave him that legendary sound. While the result was a gift to the world, Roy paid a price. He reportedly suffered constant migraines, headaches, and lingering sinus pain for the rest of his life. The very thing that made him a star may have been slowly wearing him down. People often wonder, why did Roy Orbison always wear black? Why the sunglasses? Why the emotionless stage presence? It wasn't just a fashion statement. It wasn't just about image. That iconic look was a shield. He once joked about forgetting his regular glasses and wearing dark shades by accident. But those who knew him say the truth ran deeper. Roy was deeply shy, almost painfully so. He struggled with being the center of attention. The sunglasses weren't just about the lights. They were about hiding. And the black clothes, that wasn't a brand choice. That was mourning. His stage presence, cold and still, was his way of keeping control. The emotions were in the voice. On the outside, he stayed calm. But inside, he was carrying the weight of the world. And soon, that world would fall apart. In 1957, Roy married Claudette Frady, a beautiful young woman who quickly became the light of his life and the inspiration behind the hit song Claudette. Their love story started fast and burned bright, but like many whirlwind romances, it had its struggles. Fame, touring, and pressure took a toll. They separated more than once, but in 1966, they gave it another shot and reunited. And then, just like that, everything ended. That summer, Claudette was riding on a motorcycle with Roy in Tennessee. A truck pulled out in front of them. Claudette was thrown from the bike. She didn't survive. Roy was shattered. It wasn't just the loss. It was the timing. They had just made it work again. He was finally feeling hope, and it vanished in an instant. Friends say he went numb. Fans thought his songs were sad before, but after that, they were devastating. 2 years later, Roy was touring in the UK when he got a call no parent ever wants to receive. A fire had engulfed his Tennessee home. His 2 oldest sons, Roy Jr. and Anthony, were inside. They didn't make it. His youngest, Wesley, survived only because he had been staying with his grandparents that night. It was too much. First his wife, now his children. Within 2 years, Roy had lost nearly everything. The world saw him as stoic. He still showed up on stage, still sang, but behind the curtain, he was drowning. He rarely spoke about the tragedies publicly, but the grief bled into his songs. Every lyric, every note carried a weight that few could understand. And what the world didn't know was that he was already slipping away. Only recently, with the release of private journals and interviews with close friends, have we learned just how deeply Roy Orbison was struggling. He wasn't just grieving, he was dealing with what some now believe were undiagnosed mental health issues, possibly depression, possibly PTSD. But back in the 60s and 70s, those weren't things people talked about, especially not men, especially not in showbiz. He poured everything into his music. It became therapy, but it wasn't enough. Friends say he became increasingly dependent on prescription pills to cope. Some nights he'd stay up writing for hours. Other nights he wouldn't come out of his room. There were times he spoke about quitting music entirely, and some letters suggest he even considered leaving this world behind. We often say artists suffer for their work, but Roy didn't suffer for his art. He suffered through it. In 1969, something changed. While in the UK, Roy met Barbara Jacobs, a German-born music executive. Their connection was instant, and more importantly, it was healing. They married that same year. Barbara became not just his wife, but his rock. She helped stabilize his life, managed parts of his career, and gave him a second chance at family. They had 2 sons, Roy Jr. and Alex Orbison, both of whom would grow up to protect and preserve their father's legacy. Barbara was there through the worst and the best, and she was by his side when his comeback began. By the 1980s, music had changed. Synths replaced strings, ballads were out, fast beats were in. But then something surprising happened. Roy Orbison came back. A new generation of artists, Bruce Springsteen, Bob Dylan, Tom Petty, started praising him as an influence. Suddenly, people were listening again. He released new songs like That Lovin' You Feelin' Again, a duet that won a Grammy in 1981. He began performing more. Critics called his voice timeless. Then came the Traveling Wilburys, a supergroup formed with Tom Petty, Dylan, Harrison, and Jeff Lynne. They didn't plan to start a band, they were just jamming. But what came out of those sessions was magic. Roy was reborn. But behind the smiles and awards, his health was failing fast. In 1988, at the height of his comeback, Roy was exhausted. He'd been touring, recording, promoting. He was working like he was 25 again. But his body wasn't. Privately, he was dealing with heart problems. Doctors warned him to slow down. He didn't listen. Friends say he felt he had to make up for lost time, that this was his last chance to leave a mark. He was right. That December, Roy Orbison died of a massive heart attack. He was just 52 years old. The music world was stunned. One of its most powerful voices, gone. But as tributes poured in, a new wave of stories and secrets began to surface. What made Roy's songs feel like they came from another dimension? Why did his lyrics so often predict tragedy before it happened? Fans have long felt there was something prophetic about his work. But now, with his journals, letters, and interviews revealed, a theory has emerged. Roy wasn't writing fiction. He was writing premonitions. Or maybe he was simply tuned into a frequency most of us never hear. Every heartbreak he wrote about, he lived. Every lyric about loss, he knew firsthand. And that haunting voice, it wasn't just talent, it was pain. Shaped by medical misfortune, emotional trauma, and years of silent suffering. He didn't just sing the blues, He was the blues. After his death, Roy's legacy didn't fade. It grew. In 2014, a never-before-heard demo was discovered, "The Way Is Love." Using his original vocals, his sons and producer Jeff Lynne completed the song. It was haunting, it was beautiful, and it was more than just a song. It was a bridge between the past and present, father and sons, grief and healing. It was Roy's voice reaching across time. But even that wasn't the end. In recent years, technology has made it possible for Roy's hologram to tour across the world, backed by a live orchestra. For some fans, it was a beautiful tribute. For others, it raised unsettling questions. Was it right to resurrect an artist who had spent so much of his life hiding behind dark glasses? That tension between public performance and private pain has always followed Roy Orbison. He was a man who lived in the shadows, but gave the world light. A man who lost almost everything, yet somehow still gave everything he had. His story isn't just about fame, or talent, or tragedy. It's about resilience, about using music as a form of survival, and about the kind of quiet strength most people never see until it's gone. In the end, Roy Orbison wasn't just singing for himself. He was singing for everyone who's ever felt heartbreak and didn't know how to say it out loud. And that's why his voice still matters, even now.